to here and put in this is about us and contact us pages. It's off for now. What we want to do is we want to install some basic pages. And we're going to start off with our inside of our source app. This is where we're going to be working a lot. Right now we have, let's talk about our more structure. Our app module, this thing, app.module.ts. TS stands for TypeScript again. We have a couple of modules that have been pre-installed for us with our configurations. One of them is the browser module. Okay, so we can also specify Angular can work with different platforms. By default, it works with the platform browser, which means I can output to the browser as opposed to somewhere else. And we also have Angular Core. Core is the main module that has a lot of the Angular functionality that's inside of it. And we're also including our a couple of modules that have been written for us through our scaffold. One is the app routing module, and another one is the app component. App component, think about this as the main component for our application. Okay. Notice we also have this decorator. So the decorator function, the way it works, and this is our main module, it kind of talks about a couple of things. Declarations, or a few things. Imports, providers, and bootstrap. Okay. So what really this is saying is our app component is the first component, the entry point for our entire application, this app component.ts file. Okay. So far, this is a pretty good start. I know it sounds like we're really far away from anything at this point, and you're probably right. We are pretty far away from doing anything right now. But we're going to make it more functional this time around, and we're going to do it in a step-by-step manner. Okay? Step by step. So we want to add components, and there's a couple ways to add components. We'll talk about what components are in a second. Let's go to the app.component.ts. Component-based, front-end frameworks exist. React has its own set of structures for components. And I want you to think about this as a modular approach to building up a web application. Now, this is not, Angular is not for small applications, typically. They're more for robust enterprise applications. Why? The learning curve for Angular is a little steep. And we're going to talk about why that is, because you need to know TypeScript. You have to know the structure. There are certain things that are required for each of the modules and so on. So inside of our app folder, we have a app module, which is kind of a control file. We have, or think about this as the manifest for this entire part right here. We have a component, and this is something where our main component is called app root. App root. And if you look inside of our index.html, app root is kind of a custom selector where everything is going to happen. Everything is going to be injected into app root. That's what happens here. So that's what the module is, right? App component. Then we have a template URL. This could be a template for our HTML file. So our HTML file is going to be injected. Think about it as a script, a partial file that's going to be injected into our index.html. Okay, and then we have our style URLs. We can have one or more style sheets that are associated with this HTML file. Okay, and this file here also is think about it as a code behind file that connects to our view. So our main view, if you think about this, the app.component.ts, this is our controller. The app.component.html, that's our view. So we don't have a model right now, which we'll add in later on. All right, so this still follows the model view controller pattern. It's just that we have different components for different parts. There are a lot more components here, and they're all decoupled. So in our app.component.html, you can see that we have some style in here, and we have that default page that's in here that really shows us things like our component and everything else. And this is all fine, but really all we need is this router outlet. Okay, that's one thing we're going to need. And we're also going to need our other pages that we're going to put into place. If we want to separate things with a footer and a header, that's what we're going to try and do in this module. And we're going to add in, kind of one module at a time. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. Okay, so that's what we want to do, is erase pretty much everything that's in here. Okay, because this is kind of our, I want you to think about this as a placeholder. That's what this and actually says that this is a placeholder. And we can just erase all the content below for all the things we want to do. We don't care about this. This is not going to do anything for us to have this in place. And we can't really build off this in any clear way. So the best thing to do is just erase and start over. But I want to be able to keep my last line, which is the router outlet, down in the bottom. So I'm just going to erase all. And then just kind of move back to this and just press delete, which is going to delete everything except for this, the router outlet. Okay, I'm just going to keep this open so you can see it's compiled successfully. Whenever we make a change like this, we recompile. And if I go back now to our main site, you can see that it's completely empty. Well, there's nothing in here anymore because, well, we've deleted everything. Okay, cool. So going back to this, we need to add some additional components, and we're going to talk about how these components link together to provide support for what we're doing. Okay, again, the CSS file is empty. The HTML file just has a router outlet. We're going to put in some other pieces in here. So the first thing I want to build is I want to build some components. And I want to build the Nav component. The Nav component should be built out just kind of how we had it in the Express application. Okay, we could build these up in any clear way we want, and so we should start thinking about how we want our app to be built out. I know this is kind of a high level way of thinking, but I want to be structured from the beginning right here. So in the little PowerPoints that we've given you, it talks about how to build out a sports store application. Here we're going to build out something different, but the sports store application, if you actually follow along, will show you everything you need to know to make something that's very interesting, especially for your project, which starts this week. You'll be working with your project teams, and you'll make a contract with your project teams, and you do a bunch of other things that we'll talk about in our face-to-face meetings. So there's a couple of examples we'd like you to have, so that way you can create different projects. So here I want to create another kind of thing, different than the PowerPoint. I'm going to right-click on here and add some folders. Actually, we can actually do it automatically. So there's a bunch of ways we can do stuff. I can add all these pieces, the component.ts, a component.html, and a component.css by hand. I can do that, these three pieces. And I can put it, by hand inside my own folders. And they actually do that in the PowerPoint that you've been given. But I'm partial to doing things automatically. And you can use the ng. And first of all, instead of going into week 8, let's go into the client folder when we do this. And now that I'm in the client folder, I can do all my ng commands. So we can use a command ng generate component. Also, ngg is the way to do that. If I go out to the documentation, let's go to the documentation for a second. So instead of CLI new, we can go CLI generate, ng generate. So it's ngg is the short form. We can generate different things, and one of them is what we want to do is generate a component. We can generate a component, a class, an application, and a shell, an interface, a library, a module, anything we want. Okay, they have a lot of ways we can automatically scaffold things, and it'll link into our project without us having to do some manual connection work, which is what I want to avoid too. So let's look at the component options. So we want to ng generate component and the component name. We can also give it a specific location. And there's additional switch options. Specifies the style will contain host display block. We can specify things like we want to export a component, new files at the top level of the current project, and so on. There's lots and lots and lots of options here. Skip import, all the import statements, skip selectors if you want to do that, skip tests if you want to do that, and we can specify a style specifically for that component and the type that we want and so on. But really at the end of the day, what we want to do is we just want to do ng generate and then the component is what we want. Okay, let's do that. So ng generate component, and I want to specify a location. It's going to be inside of the partials folder, and I want to call this component header, right? We want to make our first partial component. It's going to be the header or main nav. I'm just going to call it header here because the header that we had in the Express application is different than this one. And if I press enter, now remember that one thing to note is how we want this component to appear. The header component is going to be just that. It's going to say header component. What I'd like to always do is capitalize it. So I'll say header. You don't have to put the word component. The word component will be added for you when it scaffolds this out. Let's see how this looks. Enter. So it's going to go out and create a partials folder automatically. It's going to make a header component that's inside the partials folder. All right, header component. And if we look at the header component, let's go out to this for a second. It looks very similar to what we had inside of the app component. Here's my app component. But notice that the header component is right here, right? It has its own HTML, which right now it doesn't do anything. But one great way of looking at this is where it says header works. This is kind of the default component, the HTML. And if you look at the header component, it has its own selector, app header. So if I take this selector, app header, and put it inside of the app component HTML, example, if I go up to here and put in app header, and then if I save, and if I go back to here, you can see that we're still good. What Angular has done when we did ng generate is inside of the app module, it's actually added in the header component. Notice now we have a new declaration inside the declarations array, header component. So that's a beautiful thing. Instead of me having to type all this import statement, because that's what we'd have to do, import header component from partials header component, we don't have to do this. It just did it for us, and it added it in right here in the right space, in the right place, if you will. Okay. So that's what our app component does right away. Kind of our header component is the first thing we want to put in. And if we go back to our file, if we go back out to Angular, and if we look at our bookstore app right now, we can see that it says header works. Header works, right? That means that the first thing we see is the header, and that's where the header would be, right? So our HTML got injected in here, and that's how we get that message. Okay, but that's really boring. Header works. And it wouldn't be grand if we had an actual Navbar in here. We're going to replace this with a Navbar in a second by using Bootstrap, right? But let's make our other components first. Let's make our footer as well. So I want to make a footer. Let's do that. We'll do the same thing. ng generate component partials footer. And then just like we did with our header, we have a footer component. And you can see that inside of our partials folder now, we have two other folders, a footer folder and a header folder. And each folder has its own separate HTML and separate CSS file and separate app.component.ts file equivalent. Okay. So now if I take that footer as an example and I install it inside of our app.component.html, then that going to be the next thing we're going to have. So header works, and we can see that inside of the HTML. Footer works. These are just placeholders. We're going to get them to replace them in a second. I'm going to go into my app.component.html, and at the bottom, underneath the router outlet, we're going to put in a footer. App-footer. Notice it found it for us. And now, when I look at this, you can see that it compiled nicely. And if I go back out to the file, you can see that header works, footer works. They're there. So it's kind of connected into our files. And if I look at the page source for a second, you can see what it's done. Here, we just have an href, and we have a bunch of scripts. Okay, that's what's happened. So here's our script.js, our script, custom. Here's our style.js. Here's some polyfills and runtime stuff. But notice that this doesn't resemble anything that we're used to. Well, a couple of things to be sure is that this file right here, if I do an inspect, so if I go inspect, and I want to inspect this file, this is what it actually looks like from a scaffolding perspective. So I've gone into the app header. In the app header, we can see that we've got the app header component is in here, then we have a router outlet, and then we have our app footer component. And these are different components where we inject our data, right? And that's how components work. Components are a modular-based approach to building up a web application, which is a different thinking. All right, cool. So we've got this custom selector. We made an app header, and we have this custom selector, which is an app footer. We have this router outlet, which we haven't really talked about yet, and we're going to get back to this in a sec. Okay. By the way, our app routing module is right here, and it doesn't do anything right now. It's just sitting there quiet. Leave it alone. Okay. Let's get back into our header component, and let's make this header do something. Instead of it being header works, let's make it so that we get an example of a Navbar that we want to put in place up there. All right. Well, we have an example. It's inside of our server. It's inside of our views. It's inside of our partials. It's inside of our main nav. We have all this. Now, one thing we need to do is replace or remove these marks. But more or less, we have what we want our site to look like. So I'm going to grab all this. And it's easier to subtract or to remove than to build new stuff. Okay. I'm going to go into our header component.html and replace this with this. Okay, now it's going to complain because it doesn't understand what any of this is. It doesn't understand what our link is. No understanding. Okay, and the easiest thing for us to do is just remove all of these because we don't have any pages right now. I just want a single page that I want to get to for now. Okay, I wanted to keep the navigation, right? That's what I wanted. But we don't have a home link, nothing like that, and we don't have a lot of the other stuff. So href, we have a / and com229. We're going to make this a hashtag. We're not going to go anywhere right now because we're not routing. Com229 is good, right? We're going to change the style of our page, right? And it's giving us a bit of an error. It says the nav element represents a section, and it says invalid IC message, missing curly brace. Why? Because of this. This stuff does not compute. The if statements, this stuff. We're going to take this out, and we're going to take this out, and we're going to take this out. And then we got to convert this list item into a non-active link. And that should suffice. It should fix our problem, right? That's why we're getting these errors here. So we got a div tag here that closes off this way. And we got a nav tag here that closes off there. And we should be pretty much good to go. All right, next is our home link. Let's just make it so it is a hashtag. We don't have a home link right now, but I want to see this home link. And one thing we can always do is we can kind of highlight everything there, and we can go to Format Document. Okay. Doesn't like the fact that this is there. And we'll save this document, and hopefully that'll fix the problem. All right, so let's take a look and see what the issues are, because there's always going to be issues when we first do this kind of conversion, right? And it says that Angular is fantastic with errors. It says parsing template, unexpected closing tag div. It may happen when the tag has already been closed by another tag. Okay, we got a div tag closed. We got a nav tag closed. I don't understand what that means. We don't really have another closing tag anywhere else. We may be missing some kind of closing tag on one of these, right? Which also is possible. It's totally possible to do. So maybe what we need to do is maybe we need to rejig everything, but let's just see where that problem is. All right, so I'm just going to comment out this part here, and we're just going to retype it in just to see what our issues are. A lot of times whenever I have a problem with Angular, I can fix it by just doing just this, right? So if I save this, it should compile now, but it doesn't do anything, right? So we have our nav, but we haven't closed off our nav. So let's close our nav out now. So nav, that's the first step. So do we have an error there? No. And then the next thing is we want to use this structure here to scaffold the rest out. So we can say a div with the class of collapsible bar, collapse, navbar, collapse. So collapse, and then navbar dash collapse. Right, we need that. And we also want it to have an ID of navbar supported content. Inside that we want a UL with the class of navbar nav, and then ML auto. And then inside that we want a list item with the class of nav item. And inside that we want an anchor tag with the class of nav link. And inside that we want an I tag with the class of FAS, FA large, FA laptop, house. Okay. And if I click on this little link here, then we get all that stuff. And we don't have an error anymore. So somehow maybe there's a mistype. I'm not sure where. That seems to work. Which is totally fine. I'm not like totally messed up about it. But so here we're going to put in an anchor tag of hash. We don't have a real anchor to go to. Let's space this out appropriately. So the list item here, and then followed by the anchor tag underneath that, followed by the I tag, and then the name of the link, which is going to be home. That's what it looks like right now. And we've kind of captured what we had before. Just, I don't know, there might be some error here, or spacing error, or something else that's causing this issue. And I don't really care. Oh, I know what it is. The UL got deleted, and that was the problem. See? Awesome. All right, so save that. And now when we see this, we should see a nav bar that's black, the way we had it before, with a single list item. All right, and that's what we should see. And I'm just going to space out the list items so we can see them. And yeah, there it is. All right, now here's something. Notice that we don't have that list item showing. No list item, right? Even though the nav bar is there, right? We're having some issues showing up our nav bar, right? So again, this is where it almost serves us to just grab the stuff from Bootstrap and put it in here, as opposed to cut and paste. We are missing something 100%. We're missing something. What are we missing? Not sure, but we're definitely missing something. Otherwise, this would be working, right? Because this isn't even showing, right? This nav link item, right? So let's just do that. Let's just go into Bootstrap and grab that. So again, we can go to getbootstrap.com. We can go into our documentation. We can go into our components. We can go into our navbar. And instead of thinking too much, I can grab all this, or even look at it. That's also a thing we can do. to see if we're missing something. It doesn't look like I'm missing anything, but you know, there might be something I missed. So let's just grab it, copy everything, go in here, and we'll fix this out in a second. I'm just going to paste it underneath, and then I'm going to remove the stuff that I don't want, like we've done in the past. So this is going to be comp 229. This is going to be Navbar dark background dark. This is ML auto. We've done all this before, right? We don't want to make this active this time around. We're going to do that programmatically, and we're going to remove the span from this thing right here, which is our link. We want to get rid of everything here all the way down inside of our UL, right? Because all this stuff here is inside of our unordered list. So we get rid of all this, and we don't care about the form at all. That's useless for us. So now we're back to square one. The only thing that we're missing from this part is our I tag, which is going to be something that we want to add in to make it look nicer. All right, so now we had everything that we have up there, but maybe I missed something, who knows. Looks the same, mind you, but I'm not going to fret over it. I'm just going to delete this part here and start afresh, right, with what we are. So now we know I've downloaded everything from Bootstrap. I can save everything. And if I go back and look at Bookstore, there we go. There's our home. So something went wrong. We don't know what it is. Who cares? All right. That's the first step. We have our Navbar, and we have a link that doesn't work, but it's okay. Let's add the rest of them. So I'm going to scaffold it out like as if we're going to get them, and then we're going to go in here and modify them after, right? We have this structure. We do. We have this structure, and I'm not going to do it over again. We have it inside of our partials. We'll try this again. Our partials main nav. I'm just going to grab this part, this stuff here, all the way down into where we have books and contact. And I'm not going to grab the log in and log out yet. We're going to put that in after when we do authentication. So copy. And I'm going to go back into the header component, and inside the UL this time, paste. And then we're going to get rid of all the marks, all these things, because these are useless. We're also going to get rid of this top one. And we're going to leave this part in there. We're also going to change this into a hashtag, so that way it doesn't go anywhere, because we don't want it to go anywhere. Right now we just want links, just like this, and just to make sure that we have everything, so we don't have to retype all that other stuff. So just get rid of all this, get rid of this, get rid of all this, and then we're going to modify stuff so that we're ready to go for our scaffold without doing too much. I want to do this again and again because we have already done this, and it doesn't make any sense for us to redo all of it. Okay. But again, we're migrating to a better framework. That's the idea. That's why we're moving to Angular. Angular is more powerful. It has a lot more capabilities than Express, and that is the reason why we're doing it. Okay, so let's just replace these links right now. We don't have these routes. We're going to put them back, but for now, we're just going to replace them with a hashtag. And if I save this, and if everything goes well, and I go back, you can see now that I have all my favorite routes back the way they looked before. Okay, that's our header. And if you notice, it's going to appear on every one of our pages because our app component.html, think about that as the centralized template for everything else. Okay, we're going to inject everything inside of there. Very similar to what we did with Express. All right, let's continue. The next part is we want to fix our footer component. So again, just like we did, we're going to go into our footer component and our footer component.html right here. And I'm just going to copy this is not a big change, right? So this is on our bottom nav. That's what that is. I'm just going to grab all this. I mean, really, there's nothing here to worry about. We can totally use this. And just going to our here, and we're just going to replace this with bottom nav, which now, if we go back, we should see that the bottom nav is exactly starting to look like a website again, you know, from nowhere, right? And this is just from us injecting content in here. All right, so that is a great start. I'd like to add one more thing because we need to have some kind of page or home page or something like that. And how do we get that? Well, that comes from our router outlet. Remember in our app component.html, we had an app and a footer and then a router outlet. We're not going to do too much routing right now because it's a topic of another video. But what I want to do is I want to start thinking about what the routing module is going to look like. And if you notice that what the routing module does is it's empty right now. So we have a group of routes. And what I really want is my main route, which is going to be my home component. We don't have a component page for home yet, but I want to have my main route in here. The only thing we need to do to kick off routing is to specify our route, and we don't have one. I'm going to make a new component, one more component. It's going to be the head or the home component that we're going to make. So I'm just going to leave that there for now. And I'm going to go into my CLI. And let's make more components. We have partials, header and footer. Right? And what I want to have is I want to have a home component where it's going to go into different pages or content. So partials is not where it's going to go. Partials is a good name for things like header and footer, right? But what we want instead is an area where we can put our pages. So think about an about page, a contact page, a home page, and all the other pages inside of our home page, and that kind of thing. We want all those pages to be kind of used, all right? So how does this work? How does this work? Well, let's see how this works. So again, I'm going to say ng generate. We're going to use component again, and instead of partials, we're going to go into pages, and we're going to generate a brand new page called the home page. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Home. So now under pages, we have a single folder called home, and it looks very similar to what we did with our partials. It's the exact same thing. It has its own HTML component, it has its own CSS component, it says homeworks. All I want right now is all the 5 pages to be scaffolded out. So let's just do that. ng generate component, and we're going to, inside the pages folder, we're going to make the about page. ng generate component. Inside of our pages folder, we're going to put the contact page. ngg generate component c, right? nggc. Let's see if that makes any sense. I want to generate inside the pages folder. I want to make another page called the products component. And we're good to go, right? nggc. Inside the pages, I want to make a services component. nggc. Inside the pages, I want to make. So we made. Let me see what we have. Do we have enough? We have about, contact, home, products, and services. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5-page site. We're going to wait for the book component to be separate, right? Because that's going to be a separate thing altogether where we have our bookstore, if you will, right? So we're going to kind of make that separate. So we don't want to do any more nggc stuff. So what has this done for us? Well, it's done a couple things. One thing in our app module, you can see that it's installed everything. All the components are available to us through our app module, which is a good thing. It means we have access to all of these things globally. Anywhere we want, we have access to stuff. Our routing module now needs this information, all right? So we need to kind of say, and this is basic routing. I'm not going to go into complex routing. We're going to hit that later on. But more or less, what we want to do is we want to establish a path. So here's our path object. We're going to say that when we go to the home path, right, we want to go to the component that is called home component. Okay, home component. And notice that there isn't a home component. And so what we can do is we can say, hey, get home component module from here. And then boom, it's installed. Notice I didn't even type that. It just did it for me. And it's an array. So it's an array of routes. Let's just make the next one. So we're going to make some paths. We're going to do the about path next. And it's going to be a component. And it's going to be called the about component. And we don't have this. We're just going to use our little light bulb in here to put it in place. There we go. And we're going to do the next one for our products component. And then same thing, component. And then products component. And we're just going to click onto it and go import. And keep going. Path. And we're going to have the services component. And it's going to be a type component. And we need the services component. And we're going to just go here and install. We're missing a comma. That's why it's giving us the little error up there. And we want maybe services is what this should be. It's asking me, it's actually linting me. It's telling me that, hey, you forgot a thing. Let's just copy paste. Well, we have one more. We can also copy paste them like this. That's totally fine to do like this. Instead of services component and services, home, about, product services, and contact is what this is going to be. The last one on the list. And we want the contact component to be here. Contact component. I mean, you can guess what it's looking like right now, right? And then just include that too. So that kind of includes all of the components in there, a list of all of them. This is all the routes. These are all the places: home, about, product, services, contact. We don't have to do this anymore on the back end. This stuff here is going to just get scaffolded out from the front end. The front is going to take care of all this routing. We have nothing to do with the back end. So now you're going to ask, well, why? Why do we want this to happen? Well, there's a couple reasons. I'm not going to go into more routes right now, but let's put them inside of our navigation first. So let's go back to navigation, nav. So we're going to go to our inside of our header partial. So we're going to go to partials, inside of our header, inside of our header.component.html, and we're going to start putting them in place now. So it's going to be, again, /home, /about, just like what it was before, /products, /services, /books. We don't have that. In fact, what we'll do for now, because we're not going to have a books component, just for right now, we're going to just comment it out. Okay? And it won't be books, it'll be book list. Just like we had before. I'm going to keep that same structure that we had. And then finally our contact page. Okay? So that is our app, the way it works. We've added routing, and now let's see what it looks like here. So if I click on, notice it says nothing, but if I click on home, home works, about works, products work, services work, contact works. Wonderful. So these are little placeholders for all that stuff, right? Little placeholders. Wouldn't it be grand if I had a placeholder that included something like a Jumbotron that allows me to inject a Jumbotron in all of them, as opposed to me going to each of them and putting a Jumbotron in every single one? If I was going to have a Jumbotron as the main thing for everything, there's a way of doing that by creating a base page, which we're going to get to in the next video. So basic control is what we've kind of come up here. One thing we're missing our navigation, and we have no navigation for this, because we haven't added that in our Navbar brand. What if I just put in /? Where does that take me? And if I go back and click navigation, it takes me here to 4200. And in fact, nothing. There's no page that takes me here. So we need to have something that when it goes to /, then it redirects to home or something. And how do we do that with navigation? Again, I don't want to go into too much routing, but I mean, this is as simple as routing gets here. If I go to my router, so app routing module, and we can see that if my path is nothing, so let's suppose I have a path, a different kind of path. If my path is nothing, so I don't have a path like whatever, I want to redirect it. Instead of going to my component, I want to redirect it to home. Redirect to, and I can redirect to the home path, right? And I can also put an extra one, which is path match. I should put this in, is full. So to make sure there's nothing in there, right? It has to be nothing for it to redirect. And that is pretty good. So if I press save, it recompiles. And if I go back to this, it just takes me to home. If I don't put anything, if I just take this out as an example and just press enter, it takes me back to home. Right? So it's always going to go to home even if I press this button, which is good for us. And that's what that little redirect does. I mean, it's that simple. There's nothing that's complex about it at all. Okay, so that's pretty good for us right now. We've done what we wanted to do. We've built up our 5-page site very simply, and now we kind of have an understanding of what components are. If you think about them at the very basic level, without looking at some of the extra code in here, all right? If we just look at this top part right here, this component part, the selector is a custom selector, app header. The template URL is a place where we're going to get our custom HTML just for this component. The style URLs is an array of styles we can apply. We don't really use anything right now. We're just leaving it the base styles. Okay. And then we get into this part, which is the TypeScript part. And we haven't talked about this part at all. But one thing to note is that this is a TypeScript class that is being exported. Think about this as the code behind file, which means this class is directly linked. Anything we put in here is accessible inside of any one of these components in here, as an example. Okay, so that means if I want to do things like I want to get the user information or whatever, we might want to think about putting it inside the header component. We'll come back to this in another video, but this has a built-in controller. Here is this is the controller piece. That's what the TS file is. It's the controller that controls the view, the HTML file. Okay, that's what that is. And we have it for every component we've built in. So instead of having separate folders for all this stuff, a separate views folder, a separate controllers folder, what Angular has done in this case is said, okay, listen, every component is going to have its own view and its own controller. And by the way, you can have other things, its own modules, its own methods, its own models. Every component is almost like a mini website of its own. And we're going to come back to this concept later on. For now, that's the end of this video as we built up. In the next video, we're going to get into to putting in more details into our components as we continue to build our website back up to where it was before.